Hello, very glad to meet you all. On March 26, 2024 at 1:28 a.m. local time, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in the state of Maryland, USA, collapsed after a container ship collided with one of its support pillars. 6 people from a bridge repair team fell into the river, with 2 bodies found and 4 others presumed dead. Experts estimate that the closure of the Patapsco River waterway due to the bridge collapse causes financial damages of approximately $15 million USD per day. Insurance estimates the entire incident cost between $2 to $4 billion USD. The container ship MV Dolly left the port of Baltimore at 12:44 a.m. on March 26th with a scheduled route to Colombo, Sri Lanka. According to security camera footage, at 1:24 a.m., 4 minutes before the collision, the Dolly ship on the left corner of the screen was heading towards the bridge. At this moment, traffic was flowing normally on the bridge. Suddenly, all lights on the ship flickered and went out entirely. This was a sign that the ship had lost engine power, electronic systems, and much of its controllability. This happened within about 60 seconds, causing the ship to lose control and drift between the 2 floating buoys on the river. Shortly after, black smoke rose from the smokestacks. It's possible that the emergency generator was activated, but the propulsion engine had completely failed. At 1:26 a.m., the Maryland Department of Transportation was informed by the ship's crew about the incident and the possibility of a collision. Vehicles were banned from moving onto the bridge from both directions 30 seconds before the collision. According to protocol, the captain released the anchor to prevent the collision. But due to the massive inertia of the nearly 3 soccer fields long container-laden ship, it still clumsily headed towards the Francis Scott Key Bridge amidst the helplessness and desperation of those on board. At 1:28 a.m., the ship struck the bridge support pillar at a speed of about 8 knots, equivalent to 9.2 miles per hour. 4 seconds later, the steel bridge collapsed into several segments and completely crashed down into the river underneath. The Francis Scott Key Bridge is a continuous span bridge, built in 1977. It's called a span bridge because the bridge is supported by a steel truss consisting of a series of interconnected triangular blocks. It's called continuous span because this steel frame extends continuously throughout the length of the bridge, evenly distributing the load across the entire structure. Contrary to some beliefs that steel bridges in Baltimore look fragile, hence the collapse. In fact, continuous span bridges are renowned for their strength and ability to withstand heavy loads. They are connected by triangular frames, and we know that a triangle is the strongest shape in existence. All loads placed on a triangle are evenly distributed across all 3 sides, which is why it represents geometric strength. Even the immense durability of arch structures we often praise are just weaker versions of a triangle. Additionally, continuous span bridges allow crossing large rivers without the need for additional columns or support structures in the middle span. The main span of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, stretching to 366 m, is the 3rd longest continuous span in the world, only after the Astoria-Megler Bridge in Oregon, USA, and the 𝐬𝐸𝐬𝐬 Bridge in Nagasaki, Japan, which is 376 meters and 400 meters long. The entire length of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is only 2632 meters, which is half the length of the Tappan Zee Bridge in New York, but its main span length is quadruple. For those who are not very technical people like me, it looks similar to a continuous span bridge because it also has a steel truss structure, with many triangular shapes running from one end to the other. However, according to Omnicessary research, the Long Bend Bridge belongs to another group of bridges called cantilever bridges, or truss cantilever bridges. If the continuous steel frame of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is supported by 2 bridge piers, one of which was struck by a container ship, then the surface of a cantilever bridge pier is supported only on one end while the other end has no support below. At this point, the weight of the bridge will mainly be anchored at the 2 ends where there are supports. It's similar to a diving board that you often see in swimming pools. Overall, cantilever bridges, because they have 2 bridge decks extending from both riverbanks, have longer main spans, making them better at crossing rivers than continuous span bridges. Currently, the longest cantilever main span belongs to the Pont de Quebec Bridge in Canada, stretching 549 meters. Compared to continuous span bridges, cantilever bridges have a major advantage. They do not need rigid connections in the middle span because the 2 cantilever arms anchored at each end are self-supporting. This means that even if the connections in the middle of the bridge are completely broken, due to a bridge pier being struck by a container ship, for example, the other half of the bridge may still stand. Because the continuous frame of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is a rigid connection type, connecting both ends to 2 bridge piers, when one of the piers is destroyed, the complete collapse is inevitable. So why wasn't the Francis Scott Key Bridge built as a cantilever bridge from the beginning? First, we shouldn't ask such questions after the accident has occurred because changing the past is impossible. Second, cantilever bridges also have their own disadvantages. Because they are only anchored on one side, the cantilevered structure cannot be as stable as a continuous span bridge. When strong wind or heavy traffic is passing by, the bridge may sway. Since the middle portion between the two arms is only suspended in place, without any supported columns, theoretically it could collapse. And in reality, there have been times when it collapsed. The main span is also known as the suspended span of the Quebec Bridge. Yes, that's right, the bridge with the longest span mentioned earlier. It collapsed twice during its construction, killing a total of 88 workers. If these two bridge collapses occurred in 2024, there would probably be suggestions to rebuild the Quebec Bridge with a continuous span structure for safety. That's not all, because the spans of the bridge are only anchored at one end. If the bridge piers are not properly constructed, or if there is geological movement at the riverbed, it could tilt or even collapse without proper support. This goes to show that proposing to change the type of bridge after it has collapsed does not solve anything. This doesn't mean that the Francis Scott Key Bridge didn't have any design flaws. Calling it a design flaw isn't entirely accurate. However, it seems that the engineers designed a defensive line that is too thin for this important bridge. To protect the bridge piers from rogue ships, engineers came up with various solutions. In the case of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, that defensive line includes two layers. The first layer is the dolphins. What? Concrete columns are driven deep into the riverbed in front of and behind the bridge piers to deflect oncoming ships or absorb the impact from collisions instead of the bridge piers. The second defense layer is the fender. In essence, it's like the front and rear bumpers of a car. And just like a car bumper, fenders can only withstand collisions with small boats. The fender system of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is even too small to be visible from a distance. The fenders of many other large bridges are much larger, sturdier, and more prominent. Meanwhile, the container ship, 300 meters long, carrying 100,000 tons, wedged into the bridge pier with a force equivalent to, you guessed, 20,000 tons. It's also worth noting that at the time the bridge was built over 50 years ago, much smaller cargo ships were used, and the engineers did not account for the bridge's ability to withstand a direct collision with a giant ship like the MV Dolly. To give you an idea, when fully loaded with containers, the ship weighs as much as 20,000 adult African elephants, or 10 Eiffel Towers. History has proven that the protective layers of the Francis Scott Key Bridge were insufficient. In 1980, a Japanese cargo ship also collided with a bridge pier, tearing a 10 m long section of fender, but only damaging the concrete bridge pier. This means that the Francis Scott Key Bridge was not adequately protected according to today's standards. On the other hand, a report in 2018 shows that there were 35 collision incidents leading to the collapse of large bridges from 1960 to 2015. By learning from past accidents, modern bridges have become much safer. They have increasingly longer spans and wider gaps between supporting pillars, reducing the risk of collision. Dolphin piles are made larger and thicker. Fenders are also enlarged and more robustly designed, combined with reinforced, supersized bridge piers, enough to withstand any type of ship when needed. Moreover, some bridge pillars are protected by artificial islands surrounding them to strand and halt ships approaching directly, neutralizing their kinetic energy. Additionally, advancements in positioning and navigation technology have significantly reduced human-caused accidents. If you have anything else to add, please leave a comment below. As always, remember to like the video if you find it helpful, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to receive notifications. But for now, goodbye and see you again.